to publish in her new book, All Pets Go to Heaven.
Hoorah!
So I am going to read you the 2 different songs.
All dogs go to
The
heaven.
2 different songs. All dogs, yeah.
Who let the dogs out?
The 2 different stories that were published in All Pets Go to Heaven. Between the dogs playing and talking about dogs. All right. Acknowledgements. To all those who have loved and lost their beloved pets, and a special acknowledgement and thank you to all those who thoughtfully shared their heartfelt stories with me. All pets go to heaven. I've always been a believer in giving out knowledge in the simplest manner possible, so that I can understand it. I'm taking my cues from our Lord Himself, who put forth many of His teachings in parables so that everyone could understand them. My hope, my teaching methods are clear and easy to understand. All dreams spin from the same web. The last part of this chapter tells of the story of Daisy, who was a heroine with an unexpected twist. Chuck writes, on a cold winter night many years ago, when I was just 4 years old, I was asleep with my parents in their bed. Sometime later, my little sister Brenda was crying from a nightmare, and my mom went to check on her. My mother fell asleep with Brenda while comforting her. At some point in the night, my mother's dog, Daisy, began to bark, cry, and whine. I remember my father yelling at Daisy to be quiet. Daisy was a new mother and had a litter of puppies at the time. Daisy would not stop crying and barking. Even though Daisy would not stop, my father fell back to sleep. Daisy then jumped onto my baby brother's crib and began to bark uncontrollably. My baby brother, who was 18 months younger than my sister, also began to cry in his crib. The crib was located in my parents' room, and my father began to yell for my mother. When my mother did not answer, my father finally got up to see what was the matter. When my father turned on the light, the bedroom was filled with smoke. I could not see across the room. My father ran out of the room to see what was on fire. I followed my father into the living room. I saw flames going up the back wall behind the living room's recliner. By the way, it doesn't mention that that's where Daisy's puppies were, along with Daisy. I saw flames going up the back wall behind the living room's recliner. My father immediately picked me up and ran back into the bedroom and grabbed my brother, who was choking from the smoke at this point. Daisy was running back and forth, barking and crying. My father was yelling at my mother, who was now awake and had my sister. We lived on the 2nd floor, and we all ran downstairs to leave the building. My mother called for Daisy, but she refused to come to her. Daisy could not leave her puppies. My mother left the door open and ran down the stairs, calling for Daisy to follow. I remember standing across the street watching our house burn. I remember my mother screaming for Daisy. The firemen looked for her but were unable to find her. The next day, my father walked in the front door at my grandparents' house where we had taken refuge after the fire, with the puppies in his arms and Daisy following behind. The firemen reported to my father that after the house burned completely down, they were standing to make sure there was no flare-up. One of the firemen heard crying coming from the burnt debris. Daisy was lying completely over her puppies, soaking wet. Daisy and her puppies were not burned at all. Every puppy survived. Neither Daisy nor the puppies had any ill effects from the fire. Daisy was a combined poodle and Shih Tzu mix. My mom rescued Daisy from the pound, and she was pregnant. After her puppies were born, they were all given to good homes, and Daisy was spayed. Daisy was a wonderful family dog and lived a long, happy life with us.
Thank you, Daisy.
Animals communicate psychically.
This is my second story. Before we go on, I want to just tell everybody this actually happened in Torrington here
Yes.
on Wall Street, somewhere between the year of 1976 and 77, because my brother was about 18
And you
months
were
old.
born in 72.
And my brother's name is Chris. I don't know why I didn't mention him in the story. I do mention my sister.
You did. You mentioned Chris. You said he was 18 months old and in his crib.
I mentioned my baby brother. I didn't mention his name. My sister,
right.
Brenda.
The next story again shows how we can have a psychic connection with our animals. But it also shows the kind of bond that can develop between a pet and its owner. If nothing else, I want people to know their pets live on and communicate with them in this world and even from the other side. Not just nonsensical baby talk, but real conversation. You'll be surprised how much telepathy comes to you from the animals you love if you just clear your mind and listen. Chuck, who we met earlier in the book, had some guidance in realizing his own special psychic gifts, as well as how to use those talents to communicate with the animals in his life. My grandmother reminds me a lot of your grandmother, Ada. My grandmother, though, I believe survived a world much different than your grandmother's. Excuse me. My grandmother and I did not have the encouragement and knowledge of what was actually happening to us with our psychic gifts. My grandmother, always called it ESP, and my grandfather forbid the family to speak about such things. My grandmother and mother always spoke to me about how wonderful animals were and how they are living, breathing individuals created by God and have souls. They would point out how animals have eyes and ears and even have babies just like us. They would explain to me how there was not much difference between them and us. They would even tell me how our animals also have ESP. They showed me how our pets knew when the phone was going to ring or when someone was going to knock on the door. We would observe this time and time again. Some dogs were more so than others. I had a dog growing up named Dobie, who was a Doberman Pinscher. Excuse me.
Am I finished reading?
Oh, I got it.
She knew very...
Alright, who was a Doberman Pinscher. She knew every time when the phone would ring or when someone would pull into the driveway. 10 to 15 minutes before the phone would ring, she would lie by the table that had the phone on it. If someone was going to knock on the door, she would go wait at the door. Unlike the other animals that would do this for their specific master, Dobie did it every time. My grandmother would say Dobie had better ESP than she did. I did not see another dog like Dobie until my daughter's Cocker Spaniel and started noticing the same behavior. Mandy Girl, who is the Cocker Spaniel, is very smart and understands every direction or command. Since I am a dog breeder, I have 7 dogs of different breeds. I started studying their behavior toward one another. Once I realized that Dobie was not unique and that Mandy Girl also had ESP, I began to test her. I wanted to know if I could communicate with her by body language or telepathy. One day, my English Bulldog walked up to me, his name is Bubba, looked right into my eyes and said, "I love you." I tried to have him do it again, but he would not look at me in the eye again that day. A few days later went by and Bubba did it again. After the second time, I knew I wasn't crazy. This went on for a while until one day my sister, which is Brenda, told me that every time she comes to my house, Bubba will lay his big old head on her lap and look into her eyes and tell her that he loves her.